welcome to What a Screen, the podcast where I, your host, our golly Miss Dolly, chats with a special guest every week about horror films. And in particular, we discuss two films that we feel perfectly encompass a certain subgenre or theme that I've previously randomly chosen. I can't believe this is episode 24. That is absolutely wild. I never thought I'd even get past episode 5, but sure, look, here we are. This week is an interesting subject. It's one that has fascinated me for years since I was a child. The theme is urban legends. So an urban legend is a myth or a tale, and it is like the modern genre of folklore. It is an oral tradition. So, kids sitting around the campfire telling each other about scary stories is almost like our ancestors sitting around a fire telling each other stories. So it basically is the modern version of folklore. It often consists of fictional stories that are associated with the macabre or superstitions, cryptids, and even creepypasta. So it has kind of moved on with the generations, and it has now entered kind of like the internet era with creepypasta and all that kind of other fear generating kind of elements. Urban legends are often rooted in local history and pop culture. Now, everyone knows an urban legend, whether it is the legend of Bloody Mary or check your candy at Halloween because there might be razor blades in it, or drugs. One that I always remember is like, this woman and her boyfriend were sitting in a car and he got out because they heard a weird noise outside, and then she heard drip, drip, drip on the roof of the car, and when she looked out, her boyfriend's bloody head was dripping blood on the top of the car, or, several different versions of that. There's also like the cryptid stories. So there's like the chupacabra, who is, the goat thing that kind of has come from Puerto Rico. And then obviously we've got the creepypastas on the internet. So we've got like the Slender Man and, that kind of thing. And then, of course, there are different urban legends for every country as well. And seriously, there is such a long list of urban legends you can find on Wikipedia, and going through them is just great. I mean, even, the urban legends don't all have to be like horror kind of centering. You've got the curse of the Bambino was a superstition evolving from the failure of the Boston Red Sox baseball team to win the World Series in the 86-year period from 1918 to 2004. We also have a version of this here in Ireland. The Mayo football team, the Mayo male football team, will never win the All Ireland because of, is it called the Curse of Sam? Some person cursed the Mayo football team, and Mayo will never win the All Ireland until all members of that cursed team are dead. So yeah. So it's really interesting to look at like every country and every kind of community's urban legends. So this week I am discussing urban legends within horror with my very special guest Mal Jutley, who I met on the Ghouls magazine panel talk for mental health within horror. We got on straight away. Mal is a well of knowledge when it comes to horror movies, and so I knew I had to get them on the podcast. So here is my chat with Mal, and together we discuss two horror films that kind of encompass the subject of urban legends. We have I Know What You Did Last Summer from 1997, which has a lot of urban legend kind of theory in it, and also another 90s film, one of the absolute classics, CandyMan from 1992, which again, we've got the Hookman urban legend in that, and also kind of a take on the Bloody Mary legend as well. So here it is, my chat with Mal. So I would like to welcome to What a Scream, Mal. How are you?
Hey, how's it going?
Good, good. How is your little corner of the world?
Wet, actually. A lot
Yeah,
of rain lately.
no way. In Ireland, we've been perfectly sunny and beautiful.
Really?
Yeah, it's quite
Oh,
strange.
no, it's a lot of rain, just
Yeah,
constant rain, sometimes over, same old boring. But
yeah.
no, all good. Yeah, busy with day-to-day stuff.
Good, good. We met through the Girls Magazine mental health panel talk discussion. Um, how did you feel that went? Did you enjoy doing that? Because I did.
Yeah, it was amazing. Just like I said, I think I tweeted about it afterwards. Say it was
Mm.
A, so enlightening, but B, just to sort of see so many people talking the same way
Yeah,
about the same subject matter. But it was so good, and I got to meet a whole new bunch of people like
yeah,
yourself, but also just the fallout of that was just people were almost like, well, really mental health and horror. I'm like, yeah, there's a
yeah.
connection if you look into
Yeah, absolutely.
it.
So for anyone that doesn't know, would you like to kind of introduce yourself and give us a short intro about what you do?
Okay, so I always introduce myself as like an average Joe. I'm just a film fanatic. Yeah, mostly watch horror films, of course, but generally I can be found at like film festivals, online events where possible. I try and get involved as much as I can. I do always try and write a short like review of each film I watch on my social media.
Mhm.
But I'm not a writer. I'm not a producer. I'm not in the industry. I'm just a fan that enjoys movies and likes to talk about them as much as I can, really.
Yeah, aren't we all? That's kind of how we all get into it. We're just fans. Um, so how did you get into horror, and do you remember the first horror film you ever saw?
Yes, I actually tweeted about it today. I think it was.
Mm,
It's a weird one. So I got into horror by accident. My dad would have a lot of books lying around, film book actually.
mm,
So I stumbled across One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, Dirty Harry, and Jaws.
mhm.
And Jaws sort of stuck out. I'm like, okay. And then the first, I think, first few pages of Jaws is obviously the scene before the nighttime scene, and that grabbed me. I'm like, whoa. And that sort of piqued interest in horror. So I would have been about 9,
Yeah.
10, I think. So that would have been 84, 85.
Mhm.
And just when 80s horror was sort of like kicking off. And then I can't exactly remember how I ended up watching it, but I ended up watching The Exorcist first off. So yeah.
That's
Yeah,
pretty
because I
hardcore.
exactly. Yeah.
Poor
So
baby
so was
Mal.
that, I know, right? I was about 11 or 12, and I'm like, okay, this is fun. And I didn't get scared. Funnily enough, I
Yeah,
wasn't even traumatized. I was more like shocked by what I saw.
yeah,
And then soon after that, and again, I can't remember the timeline. My memory's a bit hazy now, but soon after that came Amityville Horror, which really scared me, the
yeah,
original one.
yeah.
And then Evil Dead followed up soon after that.
Mm,
And then I discovered Freddy because I was obviously that's when I went to sort of secondary school, age
yeah,
13, 14, and slashers were big then.
yeah,
And then I was like, I like these films.
yeah,
And then the local video shop, that privately owned video store, was down the road from my house. He knew who I was. So he'd lend me videos that he shouldn't
yeah,
really lend me. I would go in there, rent a horror film and sort of secretly watch that when everyone's asleep, kind of thing. And it
yeah.
just grew from there, really.
Yeah, I really love how through kind of doing this podcast, a lot of people have that shared experience of the video shop.
Yeah,
I remember when I was living in England and my nanny, we lived in Tilbury in Essex, and
yeah,
it always had this video store that was like, it seemed really out of the kind of normal for Tilbury because it was very like almost gothic, but it had this massive cutout of Pinhead from Hellraiser. And I just remember going into the video shop and being terrified,
yeah.
absolute terrified of this cardboard cutout. But it's just so funny how, and it's mainly horror fans have this shared experience of the video shop.
Yeah, and for me, it's because of the fact that half the films are rented. I had no idea. It was purely the cover. So I'm like,
Yeah,
oh, that
yeah,
looks interesting. So the cover art, I'll hire that and see what happens. So
yeah,
it purely for that reason, and then you go away and you watch it. And again, 80s had so many films that was either straight to video or
mm,
those sort of films which you probably didn't catch anywhere else.
yeah,
And I couldn't go cinema. So
yeah.
yeah, it worked a treat for me.
Yeah, and most of the time the cover was almost better than the film.
Oh yeah, of course.
And it's, you know, I find it such a shame that like today's like young generation and forward will not have that experience of going into a video shop and looking at the cover and getting really freaked out by the cover, and
Mm,
then like running away from it like I used to do. Um,
yeah.
Now they've only got like Netflix screens, and
Yeah,
it's
and
not
it's
quite the
annoying
same.
'cause no, it's not. So I again, one of my weekend jobs was working blockbusters. So I spent obviously, I think a good 2 or 3 years working blockbusters, and even when I didn't work, I would spend ages just browsing through all the sections,
Yeah,
kind of like what you do with Netflix now, where you just flick, 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 and can't
yeah,
work out what to watch. But I remember you would spend time in a video store because you ended up thinking, well, I'm here now. I've got to
yeah,
buy some, rent something. But that shared experience of, you meet somebody, oh, what do you think of this film? Oh, I saw it last week. It's really good. That
yeah.
stuff, I loved working in that store, but yeah, I although I've got a hate for Titanic because of that. It was on loop for that 3 months straight, and I hate Titanic
Oh no.
because of that.
I can imagine.
But yeah, but the video store, yeah, it's a lost art form in its own
Yeah.
right, if I'm honest.
And how do you feel that being a horror fan has kind of shaped you into the adult you are today?
That's a really good question. I don't know, if I'm honest, because so uh, films always consume me anyway.
Mm.
So I'm that kind of guy that I'll always quote films in my normal everyday language because it'll fit
Yeah.
perfectly. But horror's a good one because it sort of puts you out your comfort zone.
Mhm.
And I think so, as we discussed on the mental health podcast we did, because I've had my own issues and had the anxiety and stuff, it almost helped me sort of come to terms with a lot of stuff
Yeah.
that I wasn't sure about, and then it would help me question or push boundaries, but also find meaning or an
Yeah.
understanding. I saw this film recently, not recently, but a couple of years back, about sleep paralysis,
Mm.
and I used to suffer from sleep paralysis as a kid, and it resonated so much. I'm like, oh yeah, and I'm like, well, there's been no other medium that I could resonate to apart from this
Yeah.
film,
Yeah.
so it's helped me understand a lot of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'd be kind of the same. Like, I always resonated with horror really hard, but I didn't understand why until
Mm,
kind of within the past year or so when I really start. I mean, I've always, known there was kind of the reason I liked horror is perhaps because I was an outcast, and like Boris Karloff said, the monster was always my best friend. That was kind of
yeah.
how I grew up feeling because I was an outcast. I resonated with monsters a lot, but being an adult now and talking to more people and doing stuff like the mental health, now I understand that it's not just because, oh, I'm an outcast, I like monsters. It's because horror is just this psychological experience that if
Mm,
you've gone through mental health problems, like a trauma of some sort, it just
mm,
provides this kind of safe, controlled space to
mm,
explore those feelings. And
mm.
it's crazy to think that like horror is perhaps the only genre of movie that is that psychologically deep.
Yeah, yeah. I agree. A lot of my favorite horror films are psychologically driven. So obviously,
Yeah.
like obviously, I like Exorcist, The Omen, The Shining, for example. Even Audition is another favorite. So
Yeah.
there's this element of I don't mind slashers. I think I love watching a slasher film, but for me, it's a different experience,
Yeah.
which is why I like possession horrors and those sort of
Yeah.
things because they really sort of tweak something in my head. I'm like, yeah,
Yeah.
there's not resonate, but there's something there that I can almost relate to in a weird sort of
Yeah.
way.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. So this week's theme is one that I was kind of excited about doing, urban legends.
Mm.
Um, so what do you think of the urban legend? What is your experience of it?
Well, in movies and horror movies, I think it's always been a central premise, right? There's always
Mm,
been a boogeyman story or a spooky
yeah,
story that you hear as a child. You hear the stories of there's a monster come and get you, go to sleep, that sort of stuff, and
yeah,
those sort of things. Growing up, it's always in the back of your mind subconsciously that a monster's going to get me.
yeah,
So the urban legend stuff when that came through, and a lot, especially the '90s stuff, when that sort of picked up again, it's almost like, yeah, this is what I know.
yeah,
There is a boogeyman out there. There is someone going to get me if I don't. And you throw in superstition, and
hmm,
then suddenly you're like, how can this is really believable? And that can get really, really scary because you're like,
yeah,
yeah, I shouldn't say that.
Yeah.
or I shouldn't do this, or I shouldn't, these things will, if I do these things, then something else will happen, and then there'll be a monster released. So for
Yeah.
me, I think it's a great premise. It really is.
Yeah. I kind of like it that it's, we talk a lot, especially perhaps coming from an Irish background, we talk a lot about folklore. And you always
Yeah,
think folklore as like a history thing. It was back in the day when they didn't have TV and they had to sit around a fire and chat to each other. But urban legends are modern day folklore. It's kids telling each other about Bloody Mary or the Hookman or
yeah,
a China doll that comes to life and, all
yeah,
this kind of stuff. And
yeah.
I always remember being a kid and it was always sitting in a group and being like, tell me your scariest urban
That's right.
legend. And we'd all
Yeah,
freak the hell out of each other, like really badly. It was like my
yeah.
first kind of real nightmare fodder before the horror films. Um, so, how do you feel about urban legends kind of being a representation of like moral standards?
I think it's an interesting one because if you look at some of the films that have been made, even like Drag Me to Hell comes up
Mm.
straight away because there's a lot of sort of moral conundrums in that film, which when you think about it, you think, should I shouldn't do this, should I shouldn't believe this, and I
Yeah,
think the urban legend films really tap into that and
yeah,
make you think, well, would you do this? Would you say this?
yeah,
And if you do, well, these are the consequences.
yeah,
So I think there's a lot of it around that, which makes which again resonates with the viewer because like, oh shit, they said that or they did that. They know that
yeah,
if they do that, that will happen. So yeah, it
yeah,
taps into that really, really well.
yeah. And how do you feel that the premise of an urban legend coming into the modern day era where we've got things, where it comes from like this oral tradition and is going into a multimedia tradition like the internet, and we've got stuff like creepypasta, Slender Man. How do you feel about that kind of morphing of the urban legend?
I think it's a good way of adapting it. I mean, even things like even Host, right? That film that came out
Mm,
last year, the Zoom thing, that kind of almost is as well because there's something in the background going around. So I think it's going to evolve and change
yeah,
because it's got to be relevant. There'll be a like even some of the stuff you get like memes and stuff. There's almost you'll see a 3 second, 4 second video, and it's almost like, did I see that right? And
yeah,
you go back and watch it again. So it's going to evolve. I think it's just making it relevant to the right audience. And when I was younger and growing up, a certain type of film resonated. The one I'm going to cover today. I
yeah,
watched it recently again. It's dated pretty badly, if I'm honest,
yeah,
but at the time it worked really, really well.
yeah,
But so it's keeping it relevant, and I think urban legends are always going to be relevant because there's always a spooky story somewhere, right?
yeah, yeah. And what is your favorite classical urban legend?
Uh, I can't even think if I'm honest.
No, I think mine's Bloody Mary. I think that's always going to be a favorite of mine.
Yeah, so I watched a lot of Hammer horror films as well
Mm,
growing up, because they were either on TV or something. And then there was an element of sort of Dracula that fascinated me. Not necessarily obviously urban legend style, but there's
yeah,
that again, that monster myth,
yeah,
that alluring presence that you
mm,
kind of want to know what it's about, but know it's
yeah,
bad for you at the same time.
yeah,
That probably is my earliest sort of relevant sort of
yeah,
feeling towards urban legends. But then I'll go straight back into or jump straight forward to the 90s because that's where I rewatched a lot more of
yeah,
the sort of urban legend stuff, if I'm honest.
yeah. So let's get into the movie that you chose. Would you like to introduce it and give us a short synopsis?
Yeah, so the film I chose is I Know What You Did Last Summer. The IMDb tag is four young friends bound by a tragic accident are reunited when they find themselves being stalked by a hook wielding maniac in their small seaside town. Um, I first saw this when it came out actually, and when it came out, it was like we were like, oh wow, because it was I wasn't far off the age group. It was the kind of thing you would probably end up you know being involved in, not necessarily a
Yeah,
murder, but out with your
yeah,
friends.
yeah,
Something goes wrong, like oh shit, what do we do now?
yeah,
And it just ticked all the boxes, and it obviously is
yeah,
jumping on sort of the not bandwagon, but that rise of films at a time like Final Destination and so on and so
yeah,
forth, where it just worked really, really well. So I've chosen this one today to discuss about how that fits in with the today's theme.
yeah. I have a real soft spot for I Know What I Did Last Summer because, like a lot of horror films, it it invokes a memory of mine. So when I was a teenager, I wasn't allowed like a nice TV. I had to have the one, where you turn the dial and you've got to
Yep.
try and and you've got to point the aerial in funny ways. And so I
Yep.
remember trying to watch I Know What I Did Last Summer on one of, I think it was like Channel 4 or something. And I had to keep picking up the TV and moving it to different corners of my room and get the perfect signal. So I have a real soft spot for this film. But yeah, when I went back and watched it a couple of days ago, I was like, Jesus, it's aged really badly.
Yeah. So I saw it actually. I was at a teen horror 80s or no teen horror 90s all nighter at the Prince Charles in London, and they
Yeah.
had this Scream. I forget what else now. The Craft.
Uh-huh.
A couple of others. I forget now what they are. And when this came on, it was almost a laugh along because
Yeah.
yes, the film was what it was, but some of the dialogue, and I can't remember it. I should have written some of it down, but some of the dialogue we just laughed at. Like, did you
Yeah.
actually say that? And was it written in that way? And
Yeah.
even the delivery, just so Freddie Prinze Jr. like, yeah, you're not a great actor, and it
Yeah.
clearly shows.
I know, like, because when you think about, so there's Jennifer Love Hewitt, Sarah Michelle Gellar, Ryan Felipe, and Freddie Prinze Jr. And when you think of them, they're like,
Yeah.
yeah, they were like powerhouses of like the 90s, early 2000s.
Yeah.
Like they were in everything. Everyone had posters of them. And then when you watch this film, you're like, oh dear. Like, oh.
Yeah. Yeah.
Ooh.
Exactly. Like Freddie Prinze Jr. was the kind of guy where you knew he probably had connections, and he's good at what he did.
Yeah.
But the other three, Sarah Michelle Gellar and Ryan Fleet, like they're good. I mean, they were great in Cruel Intentions.
Yeah.
So they had that sort of But Freddie Prinze Jr. When I watch it now, I'm like, wow, okay, that worked for you.
So where do you think, so this kind of came off the back of Scream. Obviously it was done by the same screenwriter, Kevin Williamson, who also did Dawson's Creek, funny enough.
Oh wow.
So it came off the back of Scream, but where do you think this kind of teen slasher revival came from?
Yeah, Scream's a good shout, but even Candyman, and we're going to chat about it.
Yeah.
And that is probably what kicked it all off, because
Yeah.
I remember. So when Candyman came out, I was abroad. I was visiting family in Kenya, and they were like, and it had just come out. I hadn't seen it, and they were talking about it, and they're like, "Oh, this is film. If you say something 5 times, blah blah."
Yeah.
Like, wow, sounds amazing. But then, as soon as that came out, the buzz was there, and then there was all these films that just, that 90s teen thing just kicked. Like I said, the Craft happened, and the Scream, and even when I Know What It Is, it's almost like cashing in on it.
Yeah.
And I think one of the ones that stood out was Final Destination, because it was a really, really good way of projecting that story. But I think it was almost like, well, we've got a bunch of good-looking kids that everyone knows them. Let's chuck them in a horror film. So it's a no-brainer really for the industry.
Yeah, it was really kind of like the first time that they started to use big names within horror films. Whereas before, obviously, we had beautiful people in the 80s in horror films, but they weren't well known. Obviously, it was like, Johnny Depp's first role was in Nightmare on Elm Street. Kevin Bacon's in Friday the 13th.
Yeah.
But they started to use really well known. And there was this huge kind of explosion of teen kind of stars. And then they had this kind of like, again, as well as with the 80s, they had this morality thing of, if you're a careless teen, bad things will happen to you.
Yeah.
So let's chat about the urban legend aspect of I Know What I Did. I know what you did. Not I know what I did last summer. I know what you did last summer. We all stayed home last summer. That's what we did.
Exactly.
So do you want to chat a little bit about the urban legend aspect of this?
Well, yeah. I mean, obviously, I won't. I'm not going to. Everyone's probably seen the film right now, but obviously, the main aspect here is they sort of obviously going down this windy road. That hit this person, fisherman dude, and they think he's dead or somewhat dead. They sort of half finish the job, and he comes back to haunt them with that note. I know what he did last summer. Yeah. And the point, and the way I look at that sort of urban legend was like it was something that was always going to be there to bring them back. It's never going to be clean cut, right? So that legend of the fisherman was there. They've done something which they shouldn't have done. They probably should have owned up, told the police, done the right thing, but they didn't do the right thing. So therefore, here's your comeuppance. Here's your, here's what you should have. here's why you're going to get now killed because you didn't do the right thing. And I think
Yeah.
that in its own small sort of summary is the film. But when you stretch it out over an hour and a half, it actually worked because it was
Yeah.
almost like one by one you're going to die.
Hmm.
You're going to, because you didn't do the right thing. However, here, we're going to prolong it because if you had done the right thing, you would have been safe.
Yeah.
So it's almost prolonging that agony almost.
Yeah. And it's kind of based on the Hook Man urban legend.
Yeah,
And they even discuss the Hook Man urban legend in a scene in I Know What You Did Last Summer, and they kind of talk about how, it happened to a friend of a friend,
yeah,
and, they were a couple getting hot and heavy in a car, and, the Hook Man came and killed them. Um, and it almost set the framework for the film.
yeah,
If you're going to do a bad thing, which, having sex isn't a bad thing, but back in the day, teens having sex was awful.
yeah,
But it does set the framework for it. If you're going to do a bad thing, you're going to get very punished.
exactly.
Yeah. And I kind of love that, you could almost say, like, you could almost start an urban legend from I Know What You Did Last Summer. Like, oh, I know these people and they hit and run this guy and then he came back to haunt them. It's very much
Yeah.
like, yes, that could turn into a tale of an urban legend.
Oh, totally. Yeah, and I think a lot of that happens. Even that premise of the Hookman
Mm.
is probably just again, it's a spooky story to say at the time.
Yeah.
When you're out late at night with your friends, you tell, you're walking down the woods. Oh, these woods, by the way,
Yeah.
about 30 years ago, this happened in these woods. Really? Yeah, this guy, and it
Yeah.
starts from there.
Mm.
So again, that scene when they're discussing it, it is the high school kids doing messing around, shouldn't be doing, and then there's always that one person that throws in this horror story or this ghost story that to
Yeah.
freak everyone out. So
Yeah.
it's done really, really well because we all, like I said earlier, we all resonate with that. We all resonate with that one random story you hear middle
Yeah.
of the night walking down the street, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So how do you feel that, I mean, apart from the acting, how do you feel that this film has kind of stood up? Do you think it still has the scare impact, perhaps like it did back in the 90s, or do you think it's kind of lost that a little bit?
That's a funny one, a lot of horror films that when you watch them now with a different audience,
Mm.
they're received completely differently because a lot of films were of their time. So, I've seen people talk about The Exorcist and say, "Oh, it's not scary." You're like, yeah, but you weren't there when it came out in
Yeah.
1970 odd,
Yeah.
and the audience then, we didn't have 24-hour media coming to our
Yeah.
faces all the time. So a lot of stuff now people are sort of almost tuned out to. But I think there's parts of I Know What You Did Last Summer that would still work. Things. It's for me. It's if you're a teenager or 18, whatever, older, watching this film, it's still going to hit the notes because it is, like I said, it is that spooky story. It's a
Yeah.
great date movie as well. There was that, talk about date movies, that Scream is another one of those.
Yeah.
You just watch it and it's going to be the one sort of films like, yeah, it was fun to watch on a date, even though you
Yeah.
both, either one or both of you are freaking out.
Yeah.
So I think that works. Maybe not, it may not be as scary as it you would have been back then,
Hmm.
because again, it's like, okay, someone's getting chased down by a Hookman, fair enough.
Yeah.
But I think jump scares still work, or at least the shock element of it still works.
Yeah.
But the film itself, as I said earlier, people you will tune out to it now because it hasn't dated well.
Yeah.
But parts of it does work still. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. And would you recommend this film to horror fans?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. I mean, it's a lot of 90s films you've got to watch.
Mm.
Otherwise you're jumping a whole sort of era of
Yeah.
films that were made for that for those people
Mm.
growing up. The college students or the university students. So like this one definitely. Even if you don't like it,
Yeah.
you got to watch it. You got to watch
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, I kind of feel the same way. I kind of feel like if you really want to get into horror, you have to go back and do your research, basically your research. I've always said
Totally.
that thing about like even the silent films or Universal, go back, see where it all came from. But the 90s, like without this 90s slew of slasher, we would never have, Hostel or Saw or stuff like that. We never would have
Exactly.
got those movies without it.
Exactly. And I think there's a lot of films that came out in the 90s. I mean, obviously, Blair Witch is another one that stands out
Mhm.
straight away,
Yeah.
which when it came out, the marketing behind that, again,
Yeah.
kind of urban legendary as well, right?
Yeah, very
Legendary
much.
sort
Yeah.
of. by the way it was marketed. Oh, 4 people went in the woods and this happened. They got lost. Really?
Yeah.
And yeah, I remember when it came out, we were like, shit, that happened for real.
Yeah.
Did it? You know?
Yeah.
So those films you've got to watch, because it's like when I was growing up, I had to watch some of the films that came out in the 70s and 80s
Mm-hmm.
because I was like, well, there's a gap there that needs to be filling.
Yeah.
And I'm a big fan of Final Destination and the whole franchise. And I think they all probably apart from part 4, 3, one of them, I don't know which one it is now. They all work really well because again, it's that sort of that capture. It's almost like a time capsule of the 90s across these franchises of films.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. So let's move on to the film that I chose, which, like you said, it was almost like the beginning of that 90s wave, and it was the original kind of urban legend film.
Yeah.
I kind of feel that without the Candyman, we wouldn't have had I Know What You Did Last Summer or Scream or even the film Urban Legends.
Yeah.
So Candyman is a 1992 supernatural horror directed by Bernard Rose, starring Virginia Madsen, Tony Todd, Vanessa E. Williams, and Kazi Lemons. It is based on a short story by Clive Barker called The Forbidden, which actually it was set in Liverpool, and it was to do with the class systems in Liverpool. But Bernard Rose decided that he would take it to Chicago and to Cabrini Green. And kind of talk about race and class systems there, which is kind of interesting that we can kind of superimpose it across the Atlantic. It is about a grad student completing their thesis on urban legends and folklore, and they come across the legend of Candyman, who is the ghost of an artist and son of a slave murdered in the 19th century for his relationship with a white woman. So what do you think of Candyman?
Well, again, so it bothered me when I watched it for the first time. It didn't scare me, but bothered me a bit.
Okay.
More so about the way the Candyman was stalking and that presence he had.
Yeah.
The film itself was what it was. It's a great film, but he's one of the few characters, kind of like almost like Freddy for me, that was inevitable.
Mm-hmm.
And there's so much of that sticks by me. I mean, I can't recall the film word for word, but for me, it's always the presence of the Candyman, the hook, even the lighting. Like when he's in the street shots, it's just something about it just like throws you away. So for me, that and obviously the legend behind it, saying the name numerous times, that stuff just worked so much for me as a film. And I remember watching it soon after it came out. I didn't watch it straight away actually, but soon after it came out, I watched it. And like the next day in school, I think I was in school or college. I can't remember how old I was now when I watched it. We're just talking about it. Have you seen Candyman?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, don't say that. Yeah, don't say this. Really? Oh, see what happens. I'll see that bit with the bees, and he's just talking about it for over and over again. It's just one of the films that you had to watch in that era. If you didn't watch it, you're nobody almost.
Yeah, I mean, when I was little, I kind of wasn't really allowed to watch horror films, but I always remember my school friends being like, "Oh my god, I saw this film last night called Candyman," but you don't say his name in the mirror. Don't ever say his name in the mirror. And the fact that a movie leaked over into urban legend within like a playground setting, and even though it was just a movie, like I probably still wouldn't say Candyman 5 times into a mirror. Like,
but and the funny thing with that is like I remember doing that. I was like, Candyman. Oh, no, stop now. You said it 3 times. Just don't say 4 for 5 bucks.
And it's crazy that like the film media can like soak itself into like the oral tradition rather than it being the other way around. It's kind of I really like that's Candyman became that. I mean, it's a mix of 2 urban legends. We've got obviously the Bloody Mary urban legend, where if you say her name in the mirror 3 times, she appears, and also the Hook Man, because Candyman has a hook for a hand. But and then obviously we have this grad student who is researching urban legends. So we kind of see that the Candyman is an urban legend that kind of haunts a housing project, Cabrini Green, in Chicago, and it's kind of been given strength by the fact that all the inhabitants of this housing project really believes in the Candyman. How do you feel about that narrative of if we give urban legends strength, they do come to life?
Oh, 100%. Again, it's a big thing in my culture.
Yeah.
Indian culture. There's loads of Indian folklore tales and stories. Some of them are made up. Some of them, like there's just
Yeah.
it's probably one thing and it's grown to another. And I think especially the setting in the housing projects, it's almost like a community
Yeah.
that talk about the Candyman and then give life to that story. So I
Yeah.
think that works really, really well because again, it's something you can relate to in
Yeah.
terms of you hear a story, you hear a myth where you grew up, and that person lived there 30 years ago, and
Yeah.
that old house has been no one lives in anymore
Yeah.
because someone died in there, and suddenly that
Yeah.
story grows, right? And then kids add to it in school, and before you know it, it's spiraling out of control.
Yeah, absolutely. And how did you kind of feel about the way that, even though the artist who became Candyman was hunted by a white lynch mob, it is his own kind of community, the black community, that he then chose to hunt.
Yeah, that was so. Again, when I saw it, I wasn't that aware of that narrative until I
Yeah,
watched it again a few years ago, and it almost it confused me when I saw it again because I
yeah,
was like, okay, so there's something going on here that probably should have been the other way around because he
yeah,
got hunted by a lynch mob. But at the same point, I I remember watching it and thinking, well, maybe he's doing that to find someone he can help save him. As the story goes, he
yeah,
does promise, but then doesn't renege on that. But maybe that was what he's trying to do, and then he just people started almost fearing him, and he played on that fear to say, right, in that case, I'm going to hunt you down.
yeah,
Maybe he went back to so maybe there was that element of it. I'm not read too much on it if I'm honest, but
yeah.
that's how I saw it almost. So he went almost for comfort or support to his
Uh-huh.
people, as it were, but didn't get that, so then turned
Yeah.
on them as well almost.
Yeah, I think that's a really good viewpoint of it. So how did you feel about the acting, specifically Tony Todd?
Oh, brilliant. And I say that not in a flippant sort of way, but the bit where he when they show him dying and stuff, and
Mm,
the bit with the bees, and then he lifts his
mm,
coat and the bees. I'm like, man, he's just that almost cemented him as a horror icon. No
yeah,
matter what he did after that,
yeah,
he was done. He was golden.
yeah,
And I don't think anyone. I mean, I'm looking forward to the remake or the reimagining, whatever it is,
yeah,
coming up this year later. See how they play that and
yeah,
what they do with that. But that's iconic. That
yeah,
we see of people like Freddie in that, but for me, that Tony Todd's role in that was iconic because he almost
yeah,
like the way it was set in the housing projects, it just
yeah,
fitted him so well.
yeah. Originally they were going to get Eddie Murphy to play.
All right,
Could you
I didn't know
imagine
that.
Eddie Murphy? Could you?
Uh, well,
I couldn't.
was that? Didn't he do a vampire film?
He did
That comedy vampire film,
Vampire in
Vampire in
Brooklyn.
Brooklyn.
Yeah,
Yeah, so maybe it could have worked. I don't know, but
yeah,
we would have been more comedy rather than
yeah, yeah.
serious, I think. But yeah, Tony Todd, you couldn't imagine anybody was doing it now.
No, absolutely not. And I read a great story that he managed to negotiate for himself that when they did the scene, for every bee sting he got, they had to pay him an extra like $1,000. So he was pretty smart because obviously you
Yeah,
look at it and you think, oh, that must be CGI. But back then they weren't really, they couldn't have really done it CGI. So they used actual
yeah,
bees on him.
yeah. Wow,
Yeah.
that's crazy. He must have made a lot of money.
Right? Yeah. I think he ended up with like 30 odd grand more added on to his
Wow.
fee. Yeah, because he just got stung so many times. And he actually had them in his mouth. Like, how freaky is that? That's dedication. Like,
But in them days, people would do that sort of crazy
yeah.
stuff, right? I don't know where. Yeah, it was like, yeah, I'd put bees on my mouth. I'm like, are you mad? But
So would you recommend Candyman to horror fans?
100%,
Yeah.
100%. In fact, they did a recent release of it, didn't they? Like a restoration of it.
Yes.
I think Arrow did it, which I've got actually.
Yeah.
And yeah, definitely watch it. Watch it on a bigger screen. Turn the volume up super loud, and
Yeah.
just get blown away by it. I would 100% recommend it.
Yeah, and I think the fact that it still stands up as a story today, it's not like you look back and you're like, oh, yeah, that was grand for its time. It doesn't really have any
Mhm.
meaning now, but you can still look back on it and be like, it's just as relevant today as it ever was. I
Oh
think,
yeah.
yeah, that really stands up well as a great horror film.
Not only that, I mean, I know. I could tell my kids that story and they'll get freaked out by it. Right? My
Yeah,
kids are young enough to get it, but there are people that I know that have asked me about Candyman who haven't seen it because they're not old enough to watch it yet. Like my cousins and friends and stuff.
yeah,
And I'm like, you got to watch it
yeah,
because I won't spoil it, but there's this happens. Like, wow, really? Yeah. There's a bit with the bees that come flying out of
Yeah.
his mouth. Wow.
Yeah.
And it's so visually strong as
Yeah,
well
absolutely. Yeah.
that you almost want to. It's an experience. I always say, watch it on a bigger screen if you
Yeah.
can. If ever there's a re-release on the cinema, I'm going to go and watch it
Yeah.
again because it's a different experience because it's so well put together. So yeah, I always recommend not only to watch it, but it as an urban legend.
Mm.
They could. I mean, I'm going to be impressed, or hopefully be impressed with the way they market the new rebrand or
Yeah.
remake, because that 5 times thing worked back in the 90s.
Yeah.
As you said, you didn't want to say it 5 times just in case.
Yeah. Just in case Tony Todd came through. Yeah.
So there's a lot they could do with that, and that would hit a lot of people in the right way.
Yeah, absolutely. Another thing I kind of wanted to touch when it came to the urban legend, it was partly based on like Bloody Mary, Hookman, but it was also based on a 1987 murder where this woman was murdered by a guy coming through her bathroom mirror. So there was like behind
Whoa.
her bathroom mirror, there was like a hole into like the next apartment. And she was murdered apparently by this guy coming through it. And it's recently resurfaced on TikTok about this woman that was like, I feel this breeze every time I go past my bathroom mirror. And when she removed the bathroom mirror, there was like a hole going into the next apartment.
No.
So I kind of like the way that it was, it was based on that, and now this has transformed into like
Yeah.
TikTok urban legends.
Yeah. And but again, if you think about the mirror itself is probably one of the most private, personal things. It's just you looking at yourself, and that's
Yeah.
it. You
Yeah.
you expect nothing. You expect nothing but your reflection,
Yeah.
doing what you're doing, and then suddenly something pops out of it. Like, whoa!
Yeah.
That's probably one of the best ways of taking that almost secure feeling. That
Yeah.
I'm safe and secure. I'm in my bathroom. Look in the mirror.
Yeah.
What's going to happen to me here? And suddenly, bang! Out the mirror comes out his face.
Yeah.
That's again the way it works is brilliant.
Yeah, it really plays on that kind of primal fear. I mean, how many times have you've looked in the mirror, looked down, and you're like, oh my God, what if I look up again now? And there's something like it's a random thought that pops into your head, and you're just like, oh crap, oh crap, oh crap.
You say that if I'm on a motorway, right, and I'm behind a truck and it's carrying any sort of cargo, I've seen Final Destination.
Yeah.
I change lanes just in case. Never gonna happen, right? But I've seen those films, man.
Yeah.
You just change lanes and hope for the best.
Yeah. I always do this thing where if I see a hole in the wall or like in a ceiling, and I'm like, if I look into that, I can't look into it, because if I look into that, there's going to be someone's eye. Like there's just going to be a weird eye there. And it's so like, it's just crazy. Like I was saying about horror movies seeping into your subconscious and becoming almost urban legend like and folklore like, to the point where I don't want to look in a crack in a wall. Like
this goes to your question right at the start. How has horror shaped you as an adult?
Yeah.
This is what it's doing.
Yeah.
It's making
Yeah, nothing too deep. I just won't look in holes in the walls. Yeah.
It's shaping us to be wary. Yeah.
Yeah. It's giving me anxiety for everything.
Exactly.
So out of the two films, which one would you recommend over the other if you had to choose one of them?
Yeah. Based on my earlier comments about how it's not aged well, I'd say CandyMan, hands down.
Okay.
It's probably one that stood up. The Scream's done well. It stood well. Even the Craft has stood up quite well over the time, to be fair. But yeah, I know what it did last summer hasn't lasted a test of time, unfortunately. Still a good watch. Still worth watching. But CandyMan, hands down.
Yeah, I think with I Know What You Did Last Time, it's a nostalgia watch, isn't it? You're like, oh, I saw this when I was a kid, and it brings me back. Whereas Candyman, I think it's just, as you said, absolute horror classic. Tony Todd is an icon when it comes to horror. So yeah, I think I'd definitely go with Candyman, especially with the new one coming out as well. You have to
exactly, yeah. And it's one of them sort of films. If you're young, getting into horror, what film should I watch or what film should I own? It's definitely one film you should have on Blu-ray or DVD somewhere in your house.
Absolutely,
despite the myths and horror and legends about it, have it in your house, watch it regularly, enjoy it.
Exactly, yeah. So let's have a quick chat about some more urban legend horror films that you may remember that were kind of from around the same time. So we obviously had urban legends.
Yep.
Yeah, and that kind of pushed all of the urban legends together and was of that kind of teen slasher era. What did
That
you
was the
think
one
of that
set
film?
in the yeah, that was one set in the college, right? Wasn't
It
it? Was it a
was, yeah. I
college?
think it was like
That's
one
right.
of Jared Leto's very early roles.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Again, that one worked because it's the kind of thing you would do in a college, right? You'd set
Yeah,
up spooky stories and stuff, and you'd want to basically shit your friends up, and
yeah,
you meet them for the first time, whatever. So I think I saw that. That was I think I saw that at that all night as well, actually, if I'm
yeah,
not mistaken, and it worked well because
yeah,
it's almost like again, it's like I said, something not only you would do, but the setting was great. Set in a college, where
yeah.
you're new, you don't know what's going on, and suddenly
Mm,
this crazy stuff's happening around you, and you're just trying to survive. So I think it
yeah,
works really, really well. Again, it plays into that urban legend where people have heard stuff, not
yeah,
sure what they've heard, maybe misheard something,
yeah.
plays on their primal fears, and it just takes off from there, really.
Yeah, for me, it had that kind of scene in it that scared the absolute Jesus out of me. It was the one where the girl is in the car and she stops off at the petrol station, and the petrol
Yeah,
attendant's trying to get her attention, and she thinks that he's kind of like the crazy one. And it
yeah,
turns out that he was trying to tell her there was someone in the back seat. And
yeah,
that it still scares me, even thinking about it. I'm like,
yeah.
ugh.
But yeah, and it would do because again, it's that thing where you're safe in your car.
Yeah,
Right? I'm in my car. I've locked the doors. I'm safe. Nothing should happen. And as a viewer, you're like, yeah, they're safe.
yeah,
And suddenly, bang, no, they're not. And it
yeah.
does that just throw, it's almost like a gut punch. And horror movies do that really well. They sort of suck
Mm,
you into this false sense of security, you know,
yeah,
and they're like, yeah, it's all okay. And suddenly, bang, comes a jump scare, and
yeah,
it's so good.
yeah. And also, do you remember Cherry Falls?
I do. I've not seen it for ages though.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And that was the one where everyone had to lose their virginity, otherwise a killer would come and get them.
that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, what a premise. I mean, it'll get ripped to shreds now, wouldn't it?
I haven't watched it recently and I kind of want to watch it again, but I can't find it anywhere. That's the only thing. It's
It must
become
be
an urban
somewhere.
legend. It's the
But yeah,
horror movie
imagine if
world.
that came out now. Yeah, imagine if it came out now. Social media would rip it apart.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why I kind of
You
like
know?
to watch it again, just to see if it's aged as badly as I think it has.
I think it's one. Yeah, definitely one to watch soon. Actually, I'm gonna try
Yeah.
and find it. I'll let you know if I find it
Yeah,
anywhere.
do. So thank you so much for chatting about urban legends with me. And before we go, I would like to ask you what your favorite horror film is.
So it's the one that I first saw. It's The Exorcist.
Ah, that's my favorite as well.
I love it. I love everything about it. Love the score, the acting, the
Yeah,
premise. It just shocks you.
yeah.
And it's definitely my favorite horror film. I only recently saw it on the big screen actually.
Oh,
Before it
lucky.
all been VHS
Yeah,
or DVD and that. But yeah, definitely one that it just sticks with you. It's
yeah.
just so powerful, so powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. I was meant to see it on the big screen last October, but then everything shut down again. And I was like,
Yeah,
no! It's just that
yeah,
one film that I just need to see in a
yeah,
cinema.
yeah,
Um,
definitely.
I watch it at least twice a year. I am like, I've read the book countless times. I've
Yeah,
seen the stage show. Like, I'm proper obsessed with know everything about The Exorcist. Like,
yeah.
yeah, and
So
it's just, sorry, go
which
on.
is your favorite? I'll say which is your favorite cut? The one with the priests walk together away at the end, or the straight cut at the end? It's the director's cut or the extended? Was it extended cut or director's cut? I think it is, isn't it? Not sure what it's called now. Because there's two versions, right?
I didn't even know there was. I know there was like two versions of every other sequel and prequel of it. I
Yeah,
didn't
yeah, yeah.
realize there was
Yeah,
two
there's two
cuts.
versions of it. Yeah, there's two cuts. So basically, I won't ruin it for you. I may have ruined it for you now, but there are two cuts. I'll send you the link for
Yeah.
both and check them
Okay.
out. There's
Yeah.
two versions of it. Little bits, nothing too. You don't miss out much, but there are
Yeah.
little bits that add to the story.
Okay. Maybe
But
I
no,
have
I
seen
think
like
it's
it's
worth
always
checking.
that thing that like I may have seen it, but it's just all
Yeah, yeah,
melded into one that I'm just like, yeah, it's The
yeah,
Exorcist. Um,
exactly. Yeah,
yeah, I just have this real like possession is my favorite subgenre of horror, and
yeah,
The Exorcist is the ultimate possession film.
definitely. When I saw what was it, the autopsy of Jane
Jane
Doe,
Doe, yeah.
that worked really well because
Oh, that's
they're
brilliant.
hard.
Yeah.
They're hard to do those films. Some of
Yeah.
them get quite cheesy. But that one, I was like, yeah, they've done that really well. And possession horror
Yeah.
is difficult to do because it gets compared to Exorcist.
Yeah.
But that one, the way they done the autopsy, the way it worked,
Mm.
the way the whole possession thing worked for her body, yeah, really, really good.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm with you. I think possession horror is up there for me. Is one of my favorite subgenres
Yeah,
as well.
definitely. And what is the scariest horror film you've ever seen?
I hate this question because I'm not. Uh, I'm not going to be. I'm not. I don't want to sound big-headed, but nothing really scares me, if I'm
Yeah,
honest. So the only film that's ever scared me to the point where I couldn't sleep was when I saw Amityville Horror, and again I was young,
yeah,
may have been 12, 11, something like that. That scared me to death
yeah,
because it was a home, and I'm like, oh, I can look out the window and see something, So that
yeah,
scared me. Nothing really has scared me since, if I'm honest.
yeah.
Things have bothered me. The Babadook bothered me a bit, if I'm
Mm-hmm.
honest. Um, I think that's about it, really. But
Yeah,
even that, it was more so because since I've had kids, any horror film that involves kids and kids getting hurt,
yeah,
they bug me now.
yeah,
So then I get a bit sort of I flip over now. So I'm happy seeing someone's head get chopped off, but if suddenly a kid gets hurt, so I'm like,
yeah.
ooh,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of the reasons why I couldn't finish Mother by
right?
Darren Aronofsky. I just couldn't finish it.
Yeah,
I was just like, no, I know what happens.
yeah,
I don't need to see the end of it. It's fine.
yeah. There's a few films, but and I don't want to sound big headed, but yeah, nothing really scares me. I'm
Yeah,
not a jumper, so
yeah,
I won't jump at jump scares and stuff. But I get bothered by stuff if
yeah,
I'm honest.
absolutely.
But
Yeah,
I want to get scared. I was all ready
yeah,
to get scared by Hereditary, and it didn't work for me.
same.
Um, it
Yeah,
didn't. It was good, but I was like, but it didn't scare me. Please.
yeah, yeah. No, I completely agree. I'm the same. I don't get scared, but I'm always looking for that thrill. I'm always like, I hope
Yeah.
this is the one that scares the shit out of me. Like, it's like being
Let's
an
hope so.
adrenaline junkie.
That's what. Yeah, it's what it's about,
Yeah.
right?
So thank you very much. And if people would like to find you on social media, where can they reach you?
Yeah. So I'm on mainly Twitter and Instagram. Mal Jutley, so Maljutley, on both Instagram and Twitter.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for coming on
No
and
worries.
chatting about urban legends with me.
No, thank you for having me. It's been really, really good.
So that was my discussion there about urban legends with my guest Mal Jutley, and together we dissected 1992's classic CandyMan starring Tony Todd, and also 1997's I Know What You Did Last Summer starring all the 90s teen stars. So what did you think of this week's episode? Do you enjoy urban legends? What's your favorite urban legend? Why don't you let us know over on our social media at What a Scream Podcast on Facebook or Instagram, or you can at me on Twitter at what_scream. I am becoming more what's the word? More involved on Twitter over there. I don't know why I was so scared of it in the beginning. Now I've just built this lovely community of horror fans. And you can also go onto our letterbox to find out what films we are covering in the future and what films we have previously covered. Don't forget to subscribe and comment, leave a review on whatever podcast streaming service you are using. That helps us get noticed by listeners, and I would really, really, really appreciate it. I think that's everything. I also have a blog if you would like to check out some of my writing there. It is whatascream.wordpress.com, possibly. I should really learn the URL for that. But how or never. So yes, I hope you are all doing fine. I hope you are enjoying the plethora of horror-themed media that has come at us recently with obviously the opening of cinemas, if you've seen A Quiet Place 2 or The Conjuring 3 or Ben Wheatley's In the Earth, which is fantastic. I would recommend everyone to go see that while it is out in the cinema because it is a cinematic experience you all need to experience. And as always, I hope you are staying horrific. Goodbye. Shouldn't be scared of Dracula. Shouldn't be scared of the mummy. Shouldn't be scared of Frankenstein's monster. You should be